2 days after the worst blizzard in a decade finally broke apart over northern Canada, a lone hiker stood on a frozen ridge, staring down at something that shouldn't have been there. A shape. Dark. Angular. Jutting from the snow like a broken bone pushing through skin. From 100 meters away, it could have been a rock formation, a trick of the light on compacted ice. But Lucas Thompson had spent enough time in the wild to know the difference between what belongs and what doesn't. He started walking toward it. He had no idea that beneath that snow, someone was still alive. And they had been trapped in the dark for 43 days. Lucas Thompson wasn't the kind of traveler who posted photos from resort balconies. He was the kind who disappeared for weeks at a time into places most people only saw on maps. This time, the Canadian tundra had called him. His plan was ambitious but clean. Hike 30 miles into the frozen interior, camp for 2 nights at the deepest point, then loop back to the road. No partner, no backup team, just his pack, his training, and absolute solitude. He had timed the trip deliberately. Weather models predicted a major blizzard rolling through the region, so Lucas waited it out in a roadside motel. 2 days of walls rattling and wind screaming across the flats. When the storm finally passed and the sky cracked open, pale blue, sharp, and impossibly still, Lucas laced his boots and walked straight into the white. The first few hours were exactly what he expected. Beautiful in a way that made his chest ache. The snow was deep, thigh-high in places, and every step demanded negotiation. His legs burned, his lungs stung. By midday, he reached the base of a long, punishing ridge. He pressed on, one step, then the next, until the ground leveled beneath him and the world opened wide. The view from the top stopped him cold. A vast, snow-covered field stretched below, unmarked on his topographic map. The blizzard had redrawn the landscape, and there, near the center of that unmarked field, something broke the surface. At first, Lucas thought it was a rock, dark stone exposed by wind shear. But rocks don't have straight edges. Rocks don't have corners. He adjusted his route and started descending. At 50 meters, the shape began to resolve. Flat panels, riveted seams, a long, curved surface partially buried beneath packed ice. At 20 meters, Lucas stopped walking. His mouth went dry. He was staring at the fuselage of an aircraft. It was large, far larger than any private plane. Faded lettering clung to the corroded metal. The tail section angled upward at an unnatural pitch, suggesting the plane had come down hard and at speed. Most of the aircraft remained buried. The recent blizzard had evidently shifted just enough snow to expose the upper spine of the fuselage, a narrow window of visibility that hadn't existed 2 days ago. Lucas ran a gloved hand along the frozen metal. It was real. No wreckage flags, no recovery site markers, no indication that anyone knew it was here. The question landed in his gut like a stone. How long has this been here? Lucas knew the smart move was to mark the coordinates and report it when he reached civilization. He dropped his pack and started digging anyway. 2 hours passed. His arms ached, his gloves were soaked through, but he had managed to expose a section of the port side that revealed a door. It was sealed shut, rimmed in ice so thick it looked like it had been welded closed by nature itself. Lucas grabbed the handle and heaved. Nothing, not a millimeter. The sun was sliding toward the horizon. Temperatures were dropping to lethal levels. Lucas crouched beside his pack. He pulled out his portable isobutane camping stove, the one he relied on to melt snow for drinking water. He clicked the igniter. He held the roaring blue flame against the frozen seam of the door. Minutes passed. Steam hissed into the freezing air. The ice fought back, but the concentrated heat was relentless. It was softening. Lucas waited until the seam glistened wet, then holstered the stove, grabbed the handle, and pulled. The door broke free. Cold, stale air rushed out. It smelled like rust, old fabric, and copper. Lucas clicked on his flashlight and leaned inside. The beam swept across the interior. Cracked instrument panels, shattered overhead bins, seats ripped from their bolts. Everything was coated in a delicate layer of frost. It was a tomb. Everything suggested a sudden departure. A canvas backpack slumped against a wall, a broken aviation headset. Whoever had been on this plane had left, or died, in a hurry. Lucas moved deeper into the fuselage, his breath pluming in the flashlight beam. The air was heavier here. Then he heard it. Tap, tap, tap. Lucas froze. He held his breath. The tapping continued, steady, deliberate, evenly spaced. It wasn't the wind. The pattern was too intentional. "Hello?" Lucas called out. Silence. Then a low creak, the groan of something shifting weight in the dark. Every hair on Lucas's body stood on end. He took a step forward, sweeping his light toward the rear of the aircraft. At the far end of the corridor, a thin crack of pale light appeared. A hidden partition had shifted, revealing a narrow opening. He stared at it, his heart hammering against his ribs. Something was moving behind it. Lucas wanted to run. Every survival instinct screamed at him to climb out the door and disappear into the snow. He moved toward the opening instead. Beyond it was a small emergency crew compartment. He heard breathing, ragged, shallow, human. "Hello?" Lucas whispered. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, a figure emerged from the dark. A man, or what was left of one. He was skeletal, draped in layers of torn fabric and salvaged insulation material. His eyes were wide and glassy, blinking against the flashlight beam as if the light itself physically hurt him. He gripped the doorframe to keep from collapsing. Lucas lowered the light. My God. The man's lips moved. No sound came out at first. Then, cracked and barely audible, "Is someone there?" "I'm here," Lucas said. "You're not alone." The man's legs buckled. Lucas lunged forward, catching a body that weighed almost nothing. The man gripped Lucas's jacket and began to shake, not from the cold, from the shock of being found. Lucas carried the man out into the fading daylight, wrapped him in his own sub-zero thermal sleeping bag, and fired up the camp stove to heat water. The man drank the warm water slowly. As his core temperature rose, his story poured out, piece by piece. His name was Tom Adler. He was a cargo pilot. 43 days ago, he had hit severe, invisible turbulence. The instruments failed. The plane became a dead weight in the sky, and he crashed into the deep, featureless snow. Tom survived the impact, but the radio was dead. Within hours, a massive blizzard buried the wreckage entirely, swallowed it whole. Tom heard search helicopters in the first week. He screamed, he pounded on the walls, but from above, there was nothing to see. Just an endless white field. When the searches stopped, Tom retreated to the insulated emergency cabin. He survived on a small manifest of cargo rations, crackers, a few jars of peanut butter, and melted frost scraped from the walls. He rationed every calorie. He slept in shifts, but mostly, he waited in the pitch-black, suffocating silence. He tapped on the walls just to remind himself he existed. He was on his last day of strength. He had accepted that he was going to die in the dark. And then, the second blizzard came. The storm 2 days ago. The wind had scoured the plains, blowing away just enough snow to expose the roof of the fuselage. The storm that originally buried him was the same storm that eventually set him free. Lucas looked at Tom. He looked at the 30 miles of deep snow between them and the highway. Tom couldn't walk 30 feet, let alone 30 miles. If they tried to hike out together, they would both die. Lucas made a choice. He gave Tom his thermal sleeping bag, his heavy outer parka, his camping stove, and all his remaining food. He secured Tom inside the insulated cabin. "I'm coming back with a chopper," Lucas told him. "Do not go to sleep." Then Lucas Thompson stepped out into the freezing Arctic night, wearing minimal gear, and began to run. It was a death march. 30 miles through thigh-deep drifts in the dark. Without his heavy parka, the cold gnawed at Lucas's bones. He didn't stop to rest. He didn't stop to drink. He just kept his eyes on his compass and forced his legs to move. One step, then the next, pushing his body past the limits of human endurance. 14 hours later, just as the sun broke the horizon, Lucas stumbled onto the asphalt of the highway and collapsed. A snowplow driver found him 20 minutes later. By noon, a search and rescue chopper was hovering over the coordinates Lucas provided. Paramedics dropped down into the snow, cut open the fuselage, and pulled Tom Adler into the sky. The hospital room was bright, warm, and overwhelmingly loud after 43 days of silence. Tom lay in the bed, hooked to eye-vise, adjusting to the simple, staggering reality of being alive. Then, the door opened. His wife and daughter walked in. They were wearing black. They had literally been planning his memorial service the week prior. The search had been officially called off 20 days ago. His wife didn't speak. She crossed the room, pressed her forehead against his, and let out a sound that wasn't a word. It was a sound of absolute, shattered relief. Tom's weak, trembling arms came up and wrapped around her. Lucas Thompson didn't stay for the reunion. Once he knew Tom was safe, he quietly checked out of the medical clinic and went home. He had entered the wilderness looking for solitude, but he found something else entirely. He found a man who had been buried alive by the world and refused to die. A man who kept tapping on metal walls in the dark, not because he thought he'd be heard, but because he refused to give up. And there is a profound lesson in the ice. The blizzard that imprisoned Tom Adler was the exact same force of nature that freed him. The storm that nearly killed him shifted the snow just enough to save his life. The storms in our lives don't come with labels. They don't announce whether they are here to destroy us or deliver us. Often, they do both. The same failure that buries you is the one that months later might shift just enough to let the light back in. Tom survived because he was stubborn, because he kept doing the next small thing even when it felt meaningless. And Lucas Thompson, a man who walked into the wild searching for himself, found that his true purpose wasn't on his map. It was just a shape in the snow that didn't belong, and he walked toward it anyway. If this story moved you, hit the like button and share it with someone who might be going through a storm of their own. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And remember, sometimes the storm isn't the enemy. Sometimes it's the very thing that sets you free.